countries voting yes, that is, let the Germans be free of debt,
right,
to half of their debt. Greece voted yes, and Spain voted yes. Two countries that now Merkel and Schäuble have in their
Who
sight.
voted after the Treaty of Versailles on allowing Germany to be forgiven part of its debt? Nobody.
Well, there was the refinancing under the Dawes Plan, and then the refinancing under the Young Plan, and neither one of those was any good.
Cards, no.
Yeah, fine, but now we're talking about the Second World War, after the Nazi crimes, and that's the relevant part, right? The Nazi crimes, and despite that, they still were given a 50% debt write-off. Now, Greece has not attacked anybody. They haven't occupied anybody. They haven't got concentration camps. They didn't do any of that. And they get basically nothing. They get the back of Merkel's hand. So this is incompetent. Here's the incompetence. On Monday, the losses in world financial markets were estimated at 1.5 billion. Oh, what am I saying? Yeah, anyway, billion.
No.
1.5. It has to be trillion.
It's
trillion. It's trillion. Okay, this is, you get into you have to build a new room in your house.
$1 billion is only pocket change anymore.
Yeah, right. Matter. Okay, so it's I think it's 1.5 trillion. Anyway, the point is that the money at stake with Greece is peanuts. It's chicken feed compared to the losses which stupid Merkel has already inflicted on the world. In other words, if you lost money, and I urge people to do this, if you lost money in the stock market on Monday, you should certainly send a protest to Merkel, and maybe if you have a creative lawyer, you might want to try suing her or suing Lagarde at the IMF or others for these losses, because these are not necessary. In other words, I would think that the critique coming against Merkel and Schäuble in particular is you are wrecking the system. You're supposed to be a representative of finance capital, and you are wrecking the finance capital system. And it's not just them. Lagarde is another, perhaps even more extreme case. This is this bony French woman who is the head of the International Monetary Fund, right? She spends her time in tanning beds, we're told. Excuse me? Tanning beds. And the other thing, of course, is if it's not a Birkin bag, it's got to be an Hermes bag for this charming lady.
I know. So wait. Who's in the tanning bed?
Lagarde, the head of the IMF, the French woman. And you remember, you have to ask yourself, why was Strauss-Kahn Watergated out? In other words, stuff like a chambermaid for these people is nothing, right? Strauss-Kahn, I'm sure he does that. He was doing that all the time. Why did they decide to target him? And the idea was that he was planning something that was not friendly to the dollar and not friendly to this austerity policy, and therefore he had to be targeted, and that's why Lagarde is now sitting there. Otherwise, we might have had Strauss-Kahn as president of France, and we don't know what that might have looked like, but it might have been different.
Talk about tanning beds, John Boehner. Look at that guy next time.
Okay, but she's similar. She would be a perfect partner for the Speaker of the House. So she is charged by the board of the International Monetary Fund to maintain this system. In other words, she's an international civil servant. And you can see what she does. They have all allowed this Greek thing to drag out for years and years. In other words, for the sake of a few billion euros for Greece, they are destroying the euro and the system that they built over decades. And you have to say, it is an obsession. There is an austerity psychosis. This is a very good word, right? The German is Abbauwahn, right? Demontage insanity or demontage psychosis. Psychosis of cutting the budget or anything else. So they have this, right? So we looked at Merkel We looked at Schäuble. We looked at Juncker. We looked at Tusk. It's Draghi. Look, it's like a magic mountain, right? It's like Thomas Mann's world at the top of the mountain. All the nationalities are there, and they're all united in insanity.
Well, we forgot one idiot, Obama.
Yeah, look, Obama, I think in this one, Obama is a peripheral actor, specifically on Greece, right? Because this is the baby of the European Union.
Yeah, he's staying out of it, pretty much.
But no, maybe you don't know. Secretary of the Treasury Lew, right? L-E-W.
Yeah.
Who is, not well known. You could call him a non-entity, I guess.
Right.
But he made a statement the other day saying there should be negotiations, and the negotiations should include the question of a debt write-down, debt relief, I think he says, debt relief. You can see all this on Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed, and I hope people will, because I try to follow it. So he says there should be the discussion of debt relief. Now, that is very different from the insanity of Lagarde, who says, no, pay up or drop dead, right? Remember Gerald Ford, 1975? Ford to New York City, drop dead? This is now European Union to Athens, drop dead. Berlin to Athens, drop dead, and so on down the line. It is simply, it's a radical departure from normal practice, because everybody knows that General Motors, Chrysler, to look no further, got a 50% debt write-down in each case. Donald Trump, in the 1990s, when his real estate ramshackle empire was bankrupt, he also got debt relief in various forms, not quite as explicit as that, but essentially similar.
He's right behind Jeb Bush right now, second position in the polls.
He was bailed out, so he's not going to be able to say the Greeks should pay up, although I'm sure that's what he's saying. So
we'll see. He's saying, the guy's saying some very populist and interesting things. I thought that'd get a laugh out of you. We'll
demystify this illusion if we have a couple of minutes here.
We do. Let's go right through the break.
Is that a break coming up?
No, I'm going to cancel the break.
Okay, fine. So let's continue with Greece. So you can see that the group around Merkel, Schäuble, Juncker, Draghi, Tusk, some others, they decided in January, February, that they simply would not negotiate in good faith. They just wouldn't, because what they were aiming at was something more than the money. They wanted regime change. Now, the U.S. has one way of doing regime change, right? You go in and bomb the place, and maybe you have a color revolution, but either between the color revolution and bombing, that's the U.S. approach. In the case of the Europeans, it seems to be you strangle them slowly with austerity measures, and the goal is you force the governing party to compromise itself with the austerity measures. You then discredit them with that. You are funding different opposition parties inside the country, right? There's one very insidious one is called the Potami Party, the river party. It's called the river. It just flows, right? So that guy's a demagogue. He is obviously being groomed by NATO and so forth to become a rival. And then you have the old reactionary Samaras, right, of the new democracy, just the normal, traditional reactionary party. So the goal was to break the morale of Syriza by imposing these degrading, humiliating, and bone-crushing, like genocidal austerity elements, right?
Right, correct.
And the goal is regime change.
Yeah.
So that's all this stuff. Whenever they come out and say, Varoufakis is not serious, or Tsipras is not clear in what he's saying, this is simply a part of a regime change strategy on the European model, and it's just as odious, and it's just as stupid. It's actually maybe more stupid because, as I say, it has this aspect of the German economy needs the euro like it needs air to breathe, and nevertheless they're willing to risk this. Now, there is an element of miscalculation, and we have to speak about German diplomatic history in particular. You look at Merkel and Schäuble today, and Steinmeier, this character, the foreign minister, the social democrat, and the vice chancellor, Sigmar Gabriel, social democrats, okay? Their history is not very fragrant, to put it mildly. But you go back to the 1900s, the years before World War I, right? We reviewed these recently. And you'll see that one of the actual factors in European strategy is German diplomatic ineptitude, bungling, abrasiveness, turning people into enemies when you didn't have to. And you can, the word then, there was a guy in the foreign ministry, Baron von Holstein. He was known as the gray eminence of the German foreign ministry. And his line to Kaiser, right, Emperor William II, was, "We're so strong, we don't need allies. Allies get in the way. We don't want them. We're so strong, we can dominate Europe all by ourselves." Well, they couldn't dominate Europe all by themselves. The predicament of Germany is it's big enough to be the biggest, right, with 80 or 85 million. Even today, it's the same story. But it's not big enough to dominate by itself or even with a coalition. In other words, there's going to be an opposition coming forward. So in the case of von Holstein, it meant very, very specifically, there had been a possibility of maintaining this defensive treaty with Russia, the so-called reinsurance treaty. And it would have been very easy to do that. And if Bismarck had done it every time, right? Bismarck knew that he needed to keep this. The stupid Kaiser Wilhelm, right, the Emperor William II, comes along and he says, "I don't need that. I don't want that." So they let it lapse. And within a couple of years, there's a French-Russian alliance against Germany. And that's the beginning of the tragedy of World War I. And this was done out of pure stupidity. Right? Pure arrogance, pure hegemonism, I guess we'd have to say. So there's a lot of enmity against Germany based on this. And again, think about that London conference in 1953. If Greece and Spain voted in favor of you when you were, on the floor, right? You were knocked out and bleeding. Yeah. Couldn't you reciprocate that and get off this high horse that the Greeks are lazy and all this other stuff? Let's just talk about that. The Greeks are lazy. The bailout is about 250 billion euros, okay?
Yeah.
Out of that money, 90% never left Frankfurt or Berlin or Paris. In other words, it just went from one account to another because the recipients of that money were the German and French zombie banks. Deutsche Bank is a zombie bank.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Société Générale is another one. And then there's the British. The Italians are actually number 3 in exposure to Greece, and that might be the way that the contagion gets going. So 90%. And if you look at my Twitter feed, which I'm trying to plug here, but for reasons, if we look at my Twitter, we find that there's a statement from a couple of months ago from a guy called Paolo Battista, and he's a director of the International Monetary Fund. So he's on the board, okay? This is about 12 hours ago I put this up. IMF Director Paolo Battista says that of the 240 billion euros that went to Athens, allegedly, right, to Samaras, most of that, 90%, stayed in the French and German banks. So it was a bailout of the French and German banks. So it's just like what we had here, although slightly different technique. In our case, in the United States, through the Federal Reserve 27 trillion line of credit and the the Troubled Assets Relief Authority, right, the TARP, the U.S. government and the Federal Reserve directly finance these banks.
Haven't heard TARP in years.
I feel immediately insulted as soon as I hear this.
Yeah.
So, but in the case of Europe, it was as long as you had a puppet prime minister, this Samaras, this reactionary, he was glad to shift that burden. He could have said, "We can't pay. Sorry, Deutsche Bank, you're bankrupt." That would have been the smart thing, right? You're a foreign bank. I have nothing to do with you.